Hello and welcome to the show, The Awakening, here on WGSN-DB, the Going Bold and Going Solo Network. This episode of Awakening podcast may contain frank discussion on sensitive topics, including abuse and sex trafficking. Content may not be suitable for young children and could be triggering for some listeners. We cover explicit details to provide a comprehensive understanding of these important issues. The information and opinions expressed in this show are the personal views of the individual speaking based on their own experiences. They are not intended to diagnose or provide professional advice or recommendation. Listener discretion is advised. So our guest today is Kelli Malcolm. I hope I said that right because I didn't ask beforehand. So Kelli is the founder of How to Live Fully. With her help, people navigate life's challenges through spiritual coaching and tarot wisdom. Kelli is also a practicing law attorney and has been an advocate against human trafficking since 2005. Through her work as a guardian ad litem and her early exposure in trafficking cases before comprehensive federal protections were put in place. Kelli brings a rare perspective that bridges legal advocacy, lived experiences, and spiritual healing. Kelli is also the author of Awaken the Power Within, and that book can be found on Amazon. So I'm super excited about talking with you today, Kelli.
Well, it's great to be here, Tina. I'm looking forward to this as well and hoping to shed some light on areas that have been hidden in the dark for quite a while.
Yes, something that's super, super important. And as many of you guys know, Crystal Meach is here with me today. And
Hi.
so I guess we'll just kind of dig in right away, Kelli. So give us your experience and information on abuse and sex trafficking, human
Well,
trafficking.
well, I think maybe just kind of how it all began. I was a guardian ad litem, which is a person that's appointed by the court system to help abused and neglected kids. I'm the voice that speaks for them. And so not knowing abuse, not having really a background, didn't come from an abusive home. It was quite eye-opening to find, the different levels of abuse that can occur, within homes, whether it be violence, whether it be drugs, whether it be untreated mental health issues. Okay. So as I was going about my work with guardian ad litem work, I found out about being sexually abused and kids that were being sexually abused. And I had a couple of cases, and because they're minors, I won't share their names. But I would start having children that were supposed to be in my city calling from 2,000 miles away. And I couldn't figure out how they got there. And in one case, it was family members that were part of the trafficking. And I think because of all the work I've done, there's a lot of misunderstanding about trafficking in itself, different forms of trafficking, and how it occurs. So because of those cases, I would start going back to the courts, kind of raising the flag that there's something going on. This isn't just sexual abuse. These kids are being pimped out. Something is going on, and I can't understand why somebody's in New York. I can't understand why they're telling me they were in Arizona and they were doing tunnels. And what we always were told, oh, that they move drugs through tunnels, but they never talked about moving people through tunnels. And this was way back in 2004, 2005. I ran into cases of satanic ritual abuse. I had a family that was involved in that. And this is all in my own backyard. Okay. There was a sheriff in my county that in 2007 was convicted for trading little boys for meth.
Ugh.
Okay. And that went and hit the newspapers. So there was something going on. Now, way back in 2004 and 5, the crime of human trafficking was not even addressed at the federal level, let alone state levels. And so there were no laws that you could enforce if somebody was trafficking people for labor, sex, or other sorts of things, because there's a couple other forms of trafficking. So that was extremely difficult if you were in the legal system to prosecute. All you could do is prosecute them as Johns, which is $50 in a class. Okay. Also, back then, when somebody had been trafficked, it's multiple partners, people they don't know. The psychological impact is horrendous, and I can't pretend to describe what the victims went through. I wouldn't do that to them because I didn't walk in their shoes. I may have walked beside them, but I didn't walk in their shoes. And so if you're a young girl, you can't go back to school, regular school, because your mindset has been so twisted that things that you might think are normal wouldn't be considered normal behavior. Um, so they had within the country, the US, they had only 4 places that girls could go to that they could get healing as well as academics, because these are kids that are below 18. They aren't in school. Some of them did go to school, but some of them didn't, right? And as for boys who get trafficked, there were no schools way back then. And I believe it was around 2005 or 6 that the federal government started putting rules in place for trafficking, to start looking at that as a federal crime. Well, to have a federal crime, you have to cross jurisdictions. You have to cross state lines. So if the trafficking's just being done in your state, it doesn't reach a federal level. So you're not going to have federal law enforcement involved. And so once the federal law gets passed, people start realizing how to work the system.
Mm.
And so each state then needed to create their own laws of trafficking. And that was a very long process and most times a very poor process because they didn't protect the victims. And within my state, Colorado, well, there's more going on here, but back in like 2014, there was a case where a girl had been violently sexually abused, not only with human body parts, but also plungers, like a toilet plunger that landed her in a hospital. And the person was charged with 3 crimes. He got off because of how the law was written. And so the Supreme Court basically told our legislature, it was kind of what I'd call a scathing opinion, that if you really are serious about trafficking, write better laws so we can enforce them. So just because you have laws on the books doesn't mean that problem solved, right? It doesn't work that way. So within trafficking itself, there's 4 main buckets is a way to look at it. You have labor trafficking, you have sex trafficking, you have organs, body parts, and you have child soldiers. And so those activities go on worldwide. There are different networks that do those. So a lot of people now are thinking it's the cartels. Yeah, it's cartels. And just because somebody is labor trafficked doesn't mean they're not also being sex trafficked. Work in the field during the day, do the bidding of others at night. The problem with men is as bad as the problem with women. And way back in like 2010, 14, in that period of time when I was trying to get the word out, people didn't realize it was that bad with boys. I used to say the world is run by pedophiles. And I would tell them it goes all the way to the top. So you have elite groups that are making buku bucks, billions of dollars. I mean, if it's not $1 trillion industry, it's sure close if you add up all those four components, right? So you have that level of trafficking going on, but you also have other networks, just like you do within gangs. And so you have families that will traffic their kids. And and that occurs. You have things within your local neighborhoods where somebody can make some money and they intimidate the child. And because kids are easily scared, the guy will be meeting them outside their school and say, "Come with me." And they know exactly what's going to happen. And one example I can give happened with a school that you would say would be upper middle class. These are families that can afford to take a European vacation. These are the families and the kids that have, the name brand clothes. So a lot of people think no trafficking in that kind of area. Not true at all. And there was a girl that was got a boy got approached by a trafficker to date a really pretty girl, and he got paid for it. All he needed to do was get her to the prom. And in the meantime, make sure you take pictures of the family. Once the girl arrived at the prom, he skated out. He got his money and got paid. He didn't know that he was being set up, right? Because it didn't click with the kid. But the traffickers came in, threatened her that we're going to kill your brother. Here's the picture. Here's your mother if you don't come with us. And so she was trafficked for a couple months before they got her back. And it doesn't take very long for the psychological and the physical damage to occur. So trafficking is all over the place. I mean, it's in the movie industry, it's in the fashion industry, it's in sports. It's, you know, I can't think of an industry that there's not a course or a thread running through it. And
Hmm.
I think that's the biggest thing is most people think it's not going to touch me, but it
Yeah,
it does.
and talking with all of the areas that you're talking about, I have a future guest that's going to come on, and we're going to get to hear how churches
Yes.
also traffic people.
Oh yeah.
We don't see that, but one of the things that I want our viewers to hear this again, is what she said about this young boy dating this young girl, because that is one of the main topics in all of the work that I'm doing right now. That is one of the main ways that they traffic. And
Yep.
we assume trafficking is just like what Kelly said, where they're going from state to state, and we know that, but I know of young girls who are trafficked that go home to their parents every night. And in some cases, they don't know that they are being used to bring in their girlfriends to be sex trafficked because they're not necessarily being trafficked themselves. And so
Hmm.
there's this big thing. So we need, as parents, we need to hear this. And most of the time, the boy that comes to date is very coming from a very wealthy family.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing in the investigation stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And those are things that parents wouldn't think about at all. but it's, red flag to me if he wants to snap a lot of 8 by 10 colored glossies of you, and when you mention the church, the satanic ritual abuse was a pastor, and so it just, for me, I felt like I was so innocent, right? Every time I turned around, I walked into something going, what? Because it didn't mesh with how I grew up, how I thought people were. And so I had to really take a step back and start asking, those tough questions. What's going on? Why is it happening? Who's doing it? And realize that these people don't look at people as human beings, your products, and you can sell. Drugs you sell once and then you have to get a fresh supply. People you can sell over and over again. And when you realize how much money is in this trafficking business, so to speak, you can see why, if they don't have a moral compass or a conscience, they keep doing that. And you mentioned rich families. You've got a whole problem with elites. When I say it goes all the way up, some people are born into this, that this is what they're taught is normal, right? And other people, because, and this is more the movie industry and that kind of stuff, because they want the fame, they'll do whatever it takes to get to where they think they're going to go, but they're not going to go very far, and then, there's a whole nother piece of it, Tina, where it comes to organizations and maiming people to get money. I mean, it's a spider's web. So once you start pulling one thing, you find out that, someone was made blind so that they could be used to make money. Somebody's hand was cut off so they could be used to beg. I mean, it's all of it, and when you go back to the trafficking, like foster kids, well known to be trafficked, but for them, it's the price of a hamburger. That's all the trafficker has to pay. Where the investment cost for somebody who comes from a good family is more. But then they can command a higher price for that individual, be it boy or girl. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have a question, Crystal?
I don't really have a question. I just, as you were talking, I was thinking of, I know that there was a CIA director and he was talking about trafficking and some of the laws related to it. And like some of these people that are born into it, they don't even have a social security number, so you can't prosecute them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you've got, it's all out there. You've got the elite families that that's how they're raised, right? You have, and that's like one side of it. And there's this whole other side of it, which to me is more cartel, it's more gang related, it's things that are more in your backyard that what they want you to think is it's out there. When I first started, it was only in East Asia. That's where all the trafficking was. It was East Asia, not in America. And then I found out Atlanta was the worst city in the country, with Denver being number two.
Wow.
And then you start looking at the hubs, when you start looking at how goods move throughout the country, it's the same thing. And then you start learning about shipping containers and you start learning about the international things. And yeah, and you can't just point out it's one, oh, if we got rid of that, as I was saying before the show started, slavery has been going on since man's walked the earth. It's never stopped. It's just changed forms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I was just
Go
gonna
ahead.
say, I had just sent this to Tina about it was I think the show Soft White Underbelly, and they were talking about OnlyFans was one of the largest companies in the world,
Yep.
and the average member person that's consuming was like $40,000 they were spending.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then they were going to say that OnlyFans was going to be wiped out by AI.
Huh. That would be nice. But I tell you, sex sells. And we've been raised that way with advertising, the pretty girl, and becoming objects. And once you become an object, you can easily be translated into a product.
Well, and we talked about girls. We're talking about the beauty here, and you have alluded to this a little bit in this conversation, but when you and I talked last, you brought up the fact that between boys and girls, boys are a bigger commodity
Yep.
than girls.
Yeah. Well, that's because the world's run by pedophiles. I mean, homosexuality in higher places is rampant, right? And so they prefer boys. And and that's the other thing that kind of stays hidden. And that's what was so hard. I had a kiddo that was maybe in seventh grade that was sexually abused. And at that age, that's really painful,
Hmm.
if you think about it. And, the tears and the damage that can be done. And
Permanent
yes,
damage.
yeah. And, it's something that does not go away. The news has been pretty boisterous about the Roman Catholic Church, and the priests, and that's been going on for forever, right? Ever since the Catholic Church. It didn't just, that's the thing, it didn't all of a sudden just start. I believe our consciousness is expanding, and we're now being able to see more of the underbelly of things that were hidden away. But, the pedophilia in the Catholic Church is humongous. And so you talk to kids that were altar boys, and a lot of them were either approached or abused. Not all priests are bad, and I'm not saying that, but the percentage, and because it's a safe place to hide back then, and it's very safe to hide when you have money to cover up what you're doing. And you have people in power and positions of power that can look the other way and not charge somebody, make the paperwork disappear. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean we see that even on a low level. There's a story that went through my little itty bitty hometown in Colorado that happened either when I was a real little girl or before I was born. And this family had enough money, but the boy was out shooting a gun and just screwing around and shot through a stop sign and shot a girl inside the house behind the stop sign. And money made that all go away. And
Yeah.
we hear about that on these TV shows, but it's a huge when we're dealing with pedophilia and sex trafficking and things like that.
It is. It is. And because there's so much money there, it's like when you start tapping into somebody's safety net, think about the debanking, when people think, oh, they're going to take all the money out of my bank account, people go nuts. Well, these people are no different. You're taking their source of livelihood and their lifestyle away from them. And since I think they've got mental health problems, to say the least, they don't see that as wrong what they're doing. Their value system is totally skewed compared to the average Joe.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so some of the things, some of you know that I come in from law enforcement. And so some of the stuff that you hear, these pedophiles and rapists of young girls, that they'll say, well, the girl wanted it. She's the one who approached me. She wanted it. And they, honest to God, this is the mental health part of it. They, honest to God, think that when the little girl smiles as she runs by or rides her bike by or waves, that that is flirting and that she wants it.
Yep.
And they just, that's how we're dealing with this. And you know more on this level, Kelli, as how many of those guys, we kind of mentioned this briefly before we started the show, but how many of those actually go to court? What's the percentage?
Very low. It depends where you're at. I live in a bubble, right? I only live in my area. So they don't go to court very often, right? Now, whether they get resolved through plea deals and pleading out to something that's a lower offense, that could certainly be the case, right? And I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I know that certain jurisdictions work with the FBI, right? So what has been occurring, and you probably know this too with law enforcement, is it's like, let's have our local guys work with the FBI so that we can cover all bases. Because it could easily be with the FBI, now I'm getting into some of the other things. They might have somebody who has called a few times, can't get away, can't get out, right? Burner phones, the kids use the burner phones. And so the FBI is trying to rescue a kid, but in order to do that, they probably need the cooperation of law enforcement if they happen to be at a certain hotel, a certain place. And so there's operations that go on that are really, that to me, that's great that they're coordinating. I also know, to give it a positive spin, at least here, in Colorado, there's an organization that's down in Colorado Springs, and it was called Restore Innocence. They may have changed their name, but they provide bags for these rescued kids because once a child gets rescued, everything that they have is evidence. All their clothes are taken, you name it. So there's these bags that Restore Innocence will put together that gives them hygiene materials, that gives them clothes, gives them a teddy bear. I mean, anything to try and help the child acclimate back. There's another group, that a gal that was up in Greeley that was working on providing cell phones to law enforcement so that they could give the kids the burner phones to be able to use. And and for people like, say, us, right? It's being able to recognize what looks abnormal. Does it look normal that this kid is with these people? They're not out in public much, but when they are. And then there's hand signals that different people will give if they want help. And that, is kind of, and people can Google and research, what are hand signals that somebody who's being trafficked can give you so that you know to interfere or to stop or to let them get away to safety, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot has happened in 20 years. So, I mean, for me, I'm seeing progress, because more of the public is aware that this is going on and the different degrees of how it could be happening, right? And there's groups that have really formed that have kind of worked out the kinks of, the startup businesses to really be some stability within the communities to be able to help support in the effort because you need a law enforcement background to go in and rescue. You need to be a counselor, if you're going to help kids afterwards. But there's a lot of people that'll say, well, I want to do something, and I keep saying, educate yourself, talk about it, and then, be the eyes and ears in your community.
And just because I have put my head on a chopping block to save children through the course of the work that I've done, one of the things that I would say, my mom put on blinders. I don't see, I don't hear,
Right.
and I'm not going to say. You can't do that. You are part of the problem if you do that. If you
Exactly.
choose not to say anything, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And then I even go a step further because with the trafficking, it's being used to produce our goods. And if you are, I had conversations with people, well, I'm going to go to Walmart. It's cheaper. And my question to them was, for who? You're saving a buck. Somebody else is, giving their lifeblood. You have no idea what these kids have to go through to get your chocolate. You have no idea what the sweatshops are like to make the clothes. Um, and I'm like, really? So you're putting money again ahead of human life, which is what they do. So that's why to me, I see it all the same.
Hmm.
Yeah, which is most people don't like that point of view, but you have to ask yourself, right? If they put money in front of people, you're doing the same thing. And it's not all companies, there's some really good ones out there, but it just takes some time and effort to go research and find out, and find out the brands that, are not using trafficking, you know, support local mom and pop shops. You know, they might be a little more expensive, but maybe then you'll really appreciate what you're eating and what you're putting on yourself to wear.
True story. True story.
Hmm.
I know that where you're at, and we talked about this briefly, and I was thinking as you were talking that we travel across the United States and we stop at these rest homes and in these bathrooms and all of those we've started to see in the last 20 years if here's the number to call if you're being
Yeah.
trafficked or whatever.
Yep.
And we didn't see those before and it was still going on then. Only now, the federal government has stepped into place and everything like that. And this is something that we as people can watch. We don't necessarily have to stand there, grab that child and say, hey, I'll protect you. Some of us just don't have that kind of strength, but we can definitely call 911.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You can call, you can take something, a picture on a phone, like license plates, whatever you happen to see. I think there's an awful lot of ways that you can support the efforts. And for some people, it might be, hey, I'll help support these restoration bags. Or maybe it's an organization that's working with, the trafficked kids and they need donations. I mean, there's lots of ways people can help and bring hope. Because I think a lot of times those kids, they really feel like nobody cares. What's the point?
Right.
They've totally given up on themselves and they've given up on God. And especially if it's the youth pastor that was the trafficker, you kind of wonder, like, where is he? And that's where, with me and spirit, it's spirit's there, but spirit depends on us to be aware and to awaken, right?
So, and that's a good segue into how you now, through your spiritual work, how you are able to help people that have been involved in not necessarily sex trafficking, but trauma.
Mhm.
So, kind of tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I take the approach that it's mindset, right? And so it's beginning to understand those recurring thought patterns. It's a lot, I guess another way of approaching it is it's all the law, whether it's spiritual or man-made. Most people know when they run a red light, they're going to get a ticket or cause an accident. When you blow through spiritual laws, same thing happens. It's just on a different level. So to start the healing process, you have to start learning the spiritual laws. And one of them is forgiveness. And that's a huge one. Forgiving yourself, that, yeah, something really terrible happened to me, right? And accepting it, that it happened. You can't change it, but you can change your reaction to it. And so that bad thing that happened doesn't define you as a person. Your worth is that I am statement is huge. And you define your worth by your values. I am worthy. I am valuable. I am divine. I am a spiritual being, that's having a human experience. And boy, this one sucked, right? But you just have to start with forgiveness and forgiving yourself, working with forgiving the other person. On some level, it may occur. On other levels, it may not, right? But it's okay just to keep that process going and keep that door open for forgiveness. So that's with people with trauma and trauma-based, it's really starting with that forgiveness and then working on the self-image, because how people define themselves is their self-image. So if they define themselves as worthless, as useless, I'm just a tool in some guy's kit, right? When they do that, it's like, well, who told you that? And that's one experience that you had, but you're going to have more that can define you in other ways, and they can. Does it happen overnight? No. And that's part of our culture where we are the 24/7 culture that you think, boom, it's going to happen right away. I say these magic words, or I have a meditation, or I go and talk to this person. No, it's a couple steps forward, a step back, maybe a sideways. But the biggest thing is that you're beginning to be aware. You're becoming aware of those thoughts. You're becoming aware of, oh, when I go down and when I see a shadow, that's a trigger. And what's behind that shadow, instead of just shutting everything out, if you're talking trauma. For me, because I do a lot of divorce work, a lot of it's forgiveness, and most of the time it's forgiving themselves. They blame themselves, and I'm like, you didn't see the red flags, but now you do.
Yes, and I can tell you, coming from my work in divorce, that's the first thing that I hear come out of their mouth is, how did I let this go on so long? How come I didn't get out? That's like the very first words.
Exactly. And it's like you weren't ready, but that's okay. Yeah, I mean, and that's the part that they need to say. This is their life. This is their life experience. And from every experience, they're going to grow and they're going to learn. And my growth is going to be different than Tina's, than Crystal's, than Christina's, than Tara's. It's all going to be different, but it's beautifully woven for the period and the things that you came here to learn. Some people have these experiences because they're here to learn forgiveness. Some people have these experiences because they're here to learn self-love, right? Sometimes you have these experiences because you're here to learn to set boundaries.
Mm. So very true. So true. And so as we start to wind this down, Kelli, all of your contact information is going to be below the show notes, but
Okay.
how can people reach you?
Best is to go to my website, which is livelifefully.net. And there I've got lots of blog articles for people to get started if they just want to peruse. There's a contact form that they certainly can use. My courses are there, my books there. But I really just want to plant seeds. If I can just start people thinking that I am enough. I don't need to be anything more than just who I am, and let that fullness expand, right? Uh, it would be wonderful. And I'm also on TikTok. I seem to do well over there. Yeah.
Me too. So, and Crystal, how can people find you?
I'm on YouTube. I'm not on TikTok. It's just my name, Crystal Meach. Yeah, I have a podcast and you know, otherwise you can do crystalmeach@gmail.com if you're interested in just telling me your story or shooting me an email.
Okay, and for those of you who don't know, I'm a certified high conflict divorce coach, meaning that I'm trained in the complexities of divorce. I myself have dealt with abuse, dealing with broken hand and separated ribs, dislocated leg. My father was almost murdered in one of his relationships, and then my late husband went through a form of torture. You can just about name everything as abuse in that relationship. So I understand divorce, and those are the people that I work with. And you can find me or email me at coachtinalyn@gmail.com. That's CoachTinaLYNN@gmail.com. My website is Divorce Coach Specialist. I'm also on social media, Facebook under Tina Lynn Huggins. That's Huggins. On LinkedIn under Tina Lynn, or excuse me, Tina Huggins, and Instagram under Divorce Coach Tina Lynn, and also TikTok under Divorce Tina. So, Kelli, what could you give our listeners as a last bit of of information here that could help them?
There's two phrases. One is there are many paths to the top of the mountain, but the view's the same once you get there. So there's many ways when they can go. And then another one that I have on my wall over here goes, it all begins and ends in your mind. Whatever you put your mind to, that's what you're going to allow. And those we have control over. Yeah.
I love both of those. And Crystal, what is the last little bit of advice that you can give?
Oh goodness. You know, I'm just like touched by everything that Kelli said today. When I was thinking about those survivors out there, you know, for me, it was the trauma being released was really about the survival, like to really, really feel that you survived. I mean that's just a huge, huge, um, just to realize that in your body is priceless.
Mm.
So,
Amen. And so my bit of advice is that if you or somebody you know is experiencing abuse, please seek professional help. And so many people, as they go through divorce and definitely dealing with this type of trauma, they get to the point where they have suicidal ideations. If you or somebody you know is there, reach out to them. But if you are the one, then please call a National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 988. Let them talk you back off that ledge, please. And I can tell you this because I've been there. I would have taken my children's mother away 22 years ago. I have had a wonderful life for 22 years. That moment in time was only that moment in time. Please reach out for help. Also, if you are in trouble and can call 911, call 911. I recommend that you press charges and do not remove those charges. This is your ticket out of the abuse. follow that through, work through the exit plan, get out of the relationship, out of the home, out of whatever you're dealing with. Make sure that you are doing this with the help of people that can keep you safe. And the domestic violence hotline is 800-799-7233. That number again is 800-799-7233. Now I ask that you please like, comment, and share so that this can help other people. Thank you so much, Kelli, for being our guest here today.
You're welcome. Hopefully your audience gets something out of it that's positive. Yeah.
Yes, amen to that.
Mhm.
And thanks for joining me again, Crystal.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Okay. Thank you.